All right, everyone, let's get the show started. Welcome to our DevOps office hours for November 24th, 2021. For those of you in the US, happy Thanksgiving or almost Thanksgiving. My name is Eric Osterman, and I'll be leading the conversation. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. We're a DevOps accelerator, and that means that we help companies own their infrastructure in record time by building it together with your team and showing them the ropes. So if that sounds interesting, head over to cloudposse.com/quiz to get started. For those of you new to the call, the format is very informal. My goal is to get your questions answered. So feel free to unmute yourself at any time if you want to jump in and participate. If you're tuning in from our podcast or YouTube channel, you can register for these live and interactive sessions by going to cloudposse.com/officehours. We host these calls every week. Our call today is recorded and we'll automatically post a video recording of this session to our YouTube channel. So if you enjoy our content and want to support it, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. So with that said, we will kick this off. Don't have too many announcements. I think there were a lot of Amazon announcements. I didn't cherry pick them all. I'm expecting a lot more exciting announcements next week with AWS reInvent happening. If you are going to AWS reInvent, please hit me up. It'd be great to meet up with folks there in between tracks and sessions. I'll be probably hanging around the vendor floor quite a lot there. So one of the things that came across my radar was an interesting service by Netlify. So Netlify, if you're familiar with, they are one of the original static site hosting as a service providers. And it's almost ironic that you could have a SaaS whose sole purpose is just to host static sites. Shouldn't that be the easiest thing in the world? And then you go to provision a static site on AWS and S3 with Terraform, and like 100 resources later, you have your static site and fronted by CloudFlare, CloudFront. Anyways, Netlify has now a kind of Dropbox or paste bin, if you will, for static sites. So let's say you just want to show something you're working on very easily. You can just drag the files over into this area here, and it'll automatically publish a static site with a dedicated URL that you can access from anywhere. So I thought that was kind of cool.
Since this is recorded, I want to jump in here. Please don't host websites on AWS using S3 and CloudFront. Don't do that. There's a dedicated service. It's called Amplify Console. It's like a kind of shittier Netlify, especially with a change they recently did where they spam your pull requested comments. But Amplify Console is different from Amplify, and it's exactly that. S3 plus CloudFront, domain management, adding a password to your website, integration with GitHub, preview branches, and things like that. Stop using Terraform modules with S3 and CloudFront. I agree it's the best thing and it's super configurable, but most people don't need to go through that whole mess. Amplify Console is a thing.
That's really cool. Yeah, so this has been on my radar, but I always keep forgetting about it. I think we desperately need a module.
It didn't have Terraform support until recently. I think it got merged in the last half year or something.
I believe Matt GUI though has a module for this.
Yeah, that's a little hacky though, because what Amplify is actually doing under the hood is it's generating CloudFormation to do all of this stuff. So it's like an abstraction of an abstraction of an abstraction.
No, that's Amplify itself.
This right. What Eric was looking at. What Eric was looking at. Amplify, I'm saying, is, you know.
You shouldn't be care, right? If what it has to do if it works.
Yeah, I don't think I care as much, how it's implemented behind the scenes. If they expose a very simple.
What is the price difference between if you go raw resources versus this? Is there any margin over that, or?
I'm guessing Amplify has no cost, and it's just based on the underlying services.
No, it does, but really, like that's gonna be the concern. Optimizing costs. What websites are you running? It is built differently. It is more expensive. It is not as powerful. You don't get access to as many metrics. The metrics interface is not very nice. The logs are less useful than ideal. Like, it's not as powerful. I want to be fully
Mhm.
clear about that. But it's enough for most people, and it's super easy. And it handles deployments.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's cool. It's probably if you're going AWS console, then that's the way to go for you. If you already have a Terraform, then what I mean, you don't care what module to use, and you go raw and get everything anyways.
That's cool. Yeah, thanks for speaking up about that, Vlad.
Is
So then
there a Terraform provider that drags and drops your stuff automatically to the Netlify drag and drop?
No, but Anton's working on it.
Yeah.
All right. The next one is actually by yours truly, Vlad here. This was hilarious. You reached first page of Hacker News this past week, I believe, for this one. And it's a flow chart for understanding and navigating the AWS container landscape and what services to use, with a little bit of, sarcasm thrown in there. Vlad, you want to walk through your flow chart here?
Sure. First up, I really want to apologize for my shitty website. It's in the process of being redone, but I didn't have
Probably
the time,
because
the
it's
energy.
hosted on Amplify console that it's like.
Surprisingly, no. The problem,
Just
I'm
kidding.
fighting with Hugo for some things, and I posted this on Twitter, but I really wanted an accessible version of the flowchart for people with vision impairment or vision issues, and I couldn't fit the alt text into Twitter, so I just dumped it on my blog, and it looks terrible, but it works. So yeah, I made this flowchart because I got cranky saying the same things all over again when I was discussing with people in Slack, on Twitter, in real life, in emails, like, how should I run containers? No, you really shouldn't do Kubernetes. Believe me, I've done that professionally. You shouldn't do it. And I didn't have the patience or the will to write a blog post. I tried to do that. I just can't bring myself to do it. And I was like, what's a super quick way of doing it? A flowchart. And I made them publish this flowchart. There are two versions of it, which the Hacker News folks ignored because scrolling is hard. This is the lightweight version. And because people are gonna be now like, no, you're wrong, or well, actually, you should consider there's a second version if you hit back with comments that shares some more details
Oh,
about
nice.
why that is a thing and gives some more context. Basically, it's use ECS on Fargate if you can. If not, go and do. If you know what other things you need, go and use them. If it's one tiny service, ECS on Fargate and ECS on EC2. Like if you need GPUs, because Fargate doesn't yet support GPUs. Or if you needed ARM, but Fargate supports ARM as of yesterday for on-demand workloads only. Or do you need Kubernetes software and do you need the power of Kubernetes? Sure, use Kubernetes, but a lot of people don't, and it's expensive to run, maintain, and operate. And that's it in a nutshell. It's people liked it. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I
Any
thought that was
questions, comments, concerns?
I
I'm
thought that
very
was
open to
interesting.
feedback.
I'll actually say that I very much agree. I used to refer to Kubernetes as K8X because everything is 8 times more complicated and 8 times more expensive if you run it on that. But you know, I get the sense of it, so I'm very much in agreement with the advice. You know, for sure. Unless you have a really good reason for running it, don't run it.
There's on my GitHub homepage, I have my favorite tech meme, which is the Always Sunny kind of like crazy conspiracy theory guy, pointing at the cloud native landscape. And I feel like the work here, I just want to give you kudos, Lad, because I've been actually thinking to myself personally that companies the world over, when it comes to navigating operational stacks, really need flowcharts like this to kind of determine at what level of maturity that they want to be at, what kind of products match those levels of maturity.
Yeah.
And
So
honestly, this is
kudos.
super hard to do. It's not like it doesn't feel complex to me because I've spent the last I don't know how many years doing this. I am very up to date with everything that is happening. But I am also ridiculously highly paid and I cannot work with all the companies. And this is hard to keep up to date. If you look right now on the screen in the upper, what is it, left corner, there's a timeline. Like ECS on EC2 was shit. Kubernetes came out and it was amazing compared to it. That was a kick in the butt for AWS and all the other cloud providers to actually focus on fixing their more managed offerings. We got ECS on Fargate from AWS, Cloud Run from GCP, so on and so forth. But that also means staying up to date with what is happening in the industry. And that requires a lot of time, a lot of knowledge, and a lot of understanding. Like, I am lucky because I started with AWS when there were like 30 services and with Kubernetes when 1.4 was launched. So I got to see the evolution and I can understand why there are certain things in there now and I can explain them. But staying up to date is super, super hard. And I
Right.
definitely agree that we need more things like this. We need to
So
make it
that's
easy
why
for
it's
people.
so important here. You say as of late 2021, because after next week, this is going to change the landscape, and there's going to be 4 additional container services for you here.
Oh
By the
no.
way,
I'm really
I'm
hoping that we get managed Mesos. No.
by the way, when you say Lambda here, you're not talking about Dockerized Lambdas. Are those represented here?
Yeah, Lambda containers, lower right corner right now. It's
Oh, there we
valid.
go.
It's
Okay.
super, I don't want to swear, it's super, 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 super specific. Yes, there are some awesome engineers doing awesome things with it. Ken Collins, the serverless hero, is doing some absolute divine thing for his company, Custom Ink, by putting Ruby on Rails inside Lambda containers. But it is so, so, so specific. It's like EFS. Everybody that's used EFS know that it sounds easy, it gets super expensive, and it is super, super slow. You're better changing your app and adapting it to use S3. It's the same thing with Lambda containers. It's great for very specific workloads.
All right. Any other questions on this before we move on? All right. The last
Just
one was something that, sorry, go on, Max.
hosted as a separate website, like the DevOps 12 DevOps factors and stuff like this. So
Oh,
make it a
yeah.
separate domain because I'll need to refer this more often, and it will be easier if it has a separate domain.
Yeah, this can be your own, the start of something like
Yeah, if you let people
flowfactor.net.
copy paste it, then it will get stale very quickly. And if you have it on domain, then
Spoiler alert, there is a bigger thing coming here. It's launching maybe early next year, we'll see. Doing things like this takes a lot of time and knowledge. Like, this looks like a pretty flowchart. You would say that you could do this in half an hour. It's not. This took months of work, months of finding the
Wow.
ideal questions to ask, months of
yeah,
finding the ideal wording to
Yeah.
not be too mean or dismissive, months of actually making it flow nicely and be consistent. It spent a couple of weeks with my graphics designer to actually get it to look good and easily understandable. Like, this is hard to do, and I'm not getting paid for it. Like, yeah, sure, it's marketing for my consulting work, but meh, that's not something that is exactly helping me. So, and that's the
Well,
reason
not
why
yet.
we as
You
an
got to play the long term.
industry, yeah, this is why we as an industry don't have a lot of things like this, because, and why people don't update their blog posts. Like, I have a
yeah,
how to fix DNS in Kubernetes by running no local DNS from 2 years ago. It's terribly outdated. I'm not gonna update that because I don't have, me investing the time doesn't come with it. So building
It
something more
is.
consistent is complex, but I hope I figured out a way to do it, and it might be coming.
Cool. We'll look forward to having an announcement on here when you do have that ready, Vlad.
No pressure.
No pressure. So we're committing you for January 15th, or joking? All right. The next one I saw pop up a bunch of times in my news feed. It seems something kind of similar to Lens, but not Lens. Something that you deploy within the Kubernetes cluster, helps you kind of visualize what's operating inside of there, drilling down, looking at the raw resources. And then it also combines some kind of a policy type of framework on top of it, so you can detect configuration errors or validation problems. Doesn't immediately stick out for me, but I don't know. I'm sure there's a use case for some people who would want something like this. All right.
So,
Anybody else have? Sorry, go on, Max.
I started to notice that AWS is actually investing in their console for Kubernetes, and you can even now list workloads and nodes, and it kind of becoming close to Kubernetes dashboard. Does anyone know if that's really their direction?
Didn't know about that.
Yeah, me too. I was surprised. Last time I went there, and you literally can use it like a Kubernetes dashboard to navigate something. So it might make sense for AWS to buy something like this and just run it inside their console.
It doesn't seem like AWS does that many acquisitions in general. Are there any contradictions to this?
Yeah.
I was wondering the same thing. Like, AWS just doesn't acquire companies. They just choose to build it in their own way, in their own framework.
I can say for sure that they probably just don't announce them as much as you think about, but they have. I can say that I've been in discussions with a senior vice president of acquisitions at Amazon previously, and that leads me to believe if they have a senior vice president, they have an entire organization around acquiring people.
Okay.
And then we spoke with a vice president whose goal was to acquire targets in the range of X to Y spend. So they have even people who specialize in what size acquisitions they want to do within there. I think it probably just is they're absorbed really well, and they're so big that they can absorb, they can acquire like a $50 million company and pull them in, and it's not a big deal to them, and they just don't make it major announcements about it. They're doing tons of them out there.
So I'm just from my own curiosity, of the popular of the services AWS offers, anybody know of any that were explicitly and don't violate any confidentiality agreements here? So I'm not asking for that. Is there any public information on services from acquisitions?
Their online coding dashboard. I don't know. Don't recall how it's
called. Oh yes, Cloud or something. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's one that I know. Yeah. Any other ones?
Yeah, I believe Alexa was actually an acquisition. I think there was a company called Alexa Internet, I think was the company that they acquired.
Yes, it was. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, there was the original Alexa, which was like the top 1,000 sites or whatever, 1 million sites. But then Alexa, the product, the technology, that wasn't acquired, was it? Like the
voice stuff?
The voice bot.
I think that the original technology for that, I remember hearing that was acquired somewhere. And then they named it after the original acquisition they did of Alexa.
AWS really doesn't publicize their acquisition that much. They acquired Stackery a couple months ago, where they were doing some really interesting things in the serverless space. Stackery.io. That got acquired Oh, that's it. A bunch of security products were acquired. I think GuardDuty or Config started from a company that was acquired.
Hmm.
Elemental was a company that was acquired in the media space by AWS, and I think the team is now working on AWS
Oh,
Transcode,
that's
which is the
the,
next version
yeah,
of
the
Elemental. Like
transcode.
they do acquire companies and
Yeah,
integrate them, but they're not talking about them that much.
yeah,
Audible.com was
that's
the biggest
interesting.
acquisition of theirs too, but
Yeah.
that wasn't AWS.
Yeah,
There, there's been a bunch on like their product side. So like
on the yeah,
Audible
that I believe
and
on.
Ring, like they acquired Ring and
Yeah,
they
it's
acquired like a bunch of others. Yeah.
it's even makes more sense these days because usually they say that you acquire a team and not the product. And given how hard it is to hire an engineer these days, it's much easier for them probably, given their budgets, to find successful teams and buy them just for totally different stuff.
Yeah.
So not
So,
all of those products should make it to AWS console necessarily.
so I'm really curious about being able to see workloads in the AWS console. When did that start happening? Vlad, do you know more about when that was available? I haven't
Like a year
looked
ago,
into it.
I would say for
Spring
sure.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's a while.
mm,
Like they slowly added more stuff. Like initially you could just see deployment names, and then
mhm.
they added more details, readiness probes, the pod names. I don't think you can see logs. I'm not sure. I'm not really
You
using
can't
the
see,
console, but I
or what
know
about execing into pods? Can you do that?
I don't think that's a thing. Like no, it's
No,
just
but it
view
does link
only.
you. It links you to the CloudWatch logs of the
Okay,
pod that's running. There's like a hyperlink.
okay.
That's nice.
Something new here that just went GA yesterday or this week is EKS Connect. So if you have on-prem clusters or clusters in other clouds, you can install an agent that's gonna send info about the cluster to AWS, and you're gonna see it in the AWS console.
Oh,
It's
nice.
interesting for people doing multi-cluster, multi-cloud things. Again, very specific, but it went GA, I think it was this week.
What about like deploying this in COPS, like older COPS managed clusters?
I
You
think that
can
would be
deploy
it
it
exactly.
in any Kubernetes cluster you want to. It's basically just,
That's
hey,
pretty
what's running
cool.
in this cluster and shoving it to AWS so they can show it in the console. Like
Hmm.
it's not any management, not anything else. It's just showing
Yeah.
them there.
Yeah, I think that was exactly for that reason. And same was when they released their IAM roles for pods. They also backported them to COPS as well. Like the solution was compatible to COPS, so that people are not forced to migrate to EKS and just can still, like, if they okay to use COPS, then they can use new features there. That was nice.
You mean the URSA, the service account roles, or something
Yes,
else? Okay.
this it was
Have you
backported.
seen it implemented for COPS anywhere? How hard is that?
Yes, I saw. It's really easy. You just create a
Really?
custom control. You just run a controller, and it starts populating the
Oh,
same
cool.
things for you. Yeah.
Is it is it is it something that can be concurrently deployed with
Kube2IAM.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly. So it's seamless to
Yes, it
migrate
can.
over?
Yes, it can.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
That's interesting. That's something I'm gonna suggest to one of our customers who has this problem.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
much more stable, obviously. Thank you.
That's a
Yeah,
good
for that
migration
dashboard
path.
in Kubernetes, they should really pay more marketing on it because there's so many people struggling to give a read-only or read-write or per namespace dashboards to their team in Kubernetes. And they probably don't even realize they can do this with IAM roles and native AWS console by just limiting them to particular clusters in IAM. I think AWS should be, that would be a killer feature if they have this natively in IAM definitions. And
Yeah.
even like maybe some preset archetypes for dashboard sharing models, like if you want a dashboard for this namespace, there you go. If you want to read only, there you go. So that covers tons of use cases out of a box.
Yeah, if they didn't have this other integration, I would have said that'll never happen, but maybe it's something they're thinking about. So I wanted to get to some questions we had from our Slack. Let me open those up for context and review here. So not sure exactly the name here. MZAT was asking, is there a clean way to generate outputs and variables? So I'm not really sure what this was about. Was this about generating a from the resources that you are leveraging, coming up with variables, or what are we talking about?
Yeah, hey, can y'all hear me? Sorry.
Yep.
You're good?
Hey,
Okay.
Matt.
Hey, how's it going? So yeah, just like there's tools that it reads your configuration files and kind of like output some variables for you so you don't have to actually manually create those files. I was looking for something similar to that with like outputs instead of just variables. So it would read my configuration files and say for like, I have a EC2 resource and it would output like the output for ARM and for the name and for like the public IP, stuff like that. So I don't have to actually physically go through there and actually generate those outputs myself. Just 'cause I'm
no,
lazy.
that's one option. The other option is you can actually output entire resources now, which I think is what Lauren is suggesting here. And I think that's the happy medium than the code generation for 1,000 outputs. My example to that would be if you look at the Terraform AWS modules for like the VPC, it's almost as though they did this programmatically because 166 inputs, 109 outputs. At some point, like where does the madness stop?
Yeah. It was more just so I could like kind of pick and choose and delete stuff that I don't need, but I don't have to actually go through there and actually create it myself,
It gets very clicky. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Matt, you were going to say something, Calvin?
No, I was actually going to suggest what I hadn't read this before, so I was going to suggest what you pointed to there. I'm trying to think of how you programmatically would do that. I guess you would need, the easiest way would be as if you had access to the provider source code, you could look at all of the properties that are being set. Like you could actually read the schema of the resource. So you don't need the source code. You could read the provider of the schema using the provider SDK. And in theory, you could loop over that and get.
I wonder though if HashiCorp does something more programmatic. Like if HashiCorp has a JSON representation or JSON schema or something representing these. No?
There is a schema, like there's a schema object like in the providers for every provider resource, you define a schema for it and you say what its attributes are and whether it's required or not required, etc. And I'm saying that there's an SDK call you can use to point at a provider and say, give me the schema for this provider. And then you would basically have to then just generate, like walk through and generate that. But I don't know of any tools that do it. It doesn't seem like it would be that difficult, but it would be, I don't know if like it's that useful either. Like we were talking about, like it's not, I understand the original question, but like it's pretty limited that you'd want to do it that way.
Yeah.
I think output and resources is really a way to go.
Yeah, if you go, like as an example, if you go look at like the Terraform AWS provider real quick, I can just show you like what I'm talking about. I think it's Terraform provider AWS,
Yeah.
And then go into, it's in source, no, not source, internal. It's in internal. And then resources or something. What is it called? No, service. Sorry, service. And then pick any service that you want.
Amplify sounds like a good one.
Yep, and then just pick any one of those resources, like a branch or an app. Yep, and then right at the beginning, you'll see the schema is defined. Keep going right there.
Here.
Line, no, oh, it's line 44. So right there, it actually shows you. Here's all the properties and their types and whether they're computed, optional, if they can be a list, et cetera, et cetera. So basically, you can interrogate this from the compiled. There are other methods in the SDK to like load this, load a binary, which is the provider, and then get its schema. So basically, you could return its schema, and then you'd be able to generate them from there. So.
Cool. Well, I appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's jump into the next question. Kind of similar, maybe. Does anyone have a nice way to handle? Oh, no, it's totally different. Schema creations using Terraform on RDS MySQL. So there, he says there's a bunch of examples for how to do it with Postgres, but he hasn't come across a nice one for MySQL. I think we have one that we publish, just not we don't promote it that much.
This is one of those ones I want to ask why.
Yeah.
Why don't you
If
use a tool that's meant for it, like Flyway or something?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
I'm even surprised that someone have found examples for Postgres. Because when you work with schema, you have to realize that you will have migrations, and that is not what Terraform is doing well. It's gonna be a
maybe,
set of,
but maybe it's not the entire schema for all tables and so forth. Maybe it's just the database schema itself, so that you can provision tables inside of it.
You can do that. You can do that in a migration if you have an instance up.
Yeah, but the
it's
scope or the
create database.
permissions is much greater. Like if you have a multi-tenant database cluster, you might want to, in Terraform, just create the little database containers and then give those to teams that they can run whatever.
Didn't we have a module for this, like
Yeah, I think
database
I'm
tenant or
gonna
something?
check if
I was doing the same
not sure
module
if-
in my previous company, but I know we have it too here because I saw it. Yes, database tenant.
Yeah, I don't think we upstreamed it yet, because we do
Yeah,
something
Jeremy.
similar. We do something similar for our Postgres component, which will create the additional databases and provision users there, so you can hand that out. Yeah, we have this for MySQL as well. We just haven't published it, I guess. Unless there's a PR for it here, that doesn't look like it. Yeah, these are
This is
old
again sounds
models.
like someone trying to bin pack databases in one RDS instance to save money on AWS. So AWS, if you hear me, just start billing people for database usage instead of like a flat rate that running huge. Like just make those plans that cover the tiny one table databases, and people will not struggle with this anymore because it will be easier to operate RDS instances then.
What about, isn't that maybe what serverless is good for?
I mean, you need more like DynamoDB, but
yes,
like a SQL version of DynamoDB.
Yeah, that would completely eliminate all of these questions because we were exact same position and try and bin pack our microservices because you cannot create a medium RDS for every microservice.
All right, so then Nat asks again here, how do you bootstrap the IAM, like service count machine roles for some CICD system to allow the repository to self-manage. That's me reading between the lines. I'm not following 100%. Matt, do you want to clarify the problem?
Yeah, so I have a simple repository that has some resources I want to create, and I want to be able to create that role and then have what I'm going to use to GitHub Actions basically to assume that role and start managing itself basically through like GitOps basically. So it's getting to that point. How would I get to that point, kind of?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting one. It's a little bit of a catch-22, and you got to be careful if you're using Terraform to manage the thing that manages Terraform, or it'll destroy itself mid-flight. I think one important thing to call out though is the layers. And if you've been around Cloud Posse for some time or our office hours, you'll see me always bring this up. So let me restate the problem statement. So you're using GitHub Actions, you're using self-hosted runners with GitHub Actions. You want to give those self-hosted runners an IAM role such that when a process such as Terraform is run as a step in that workflow, that it has the permissions to Terraform stuff on AWS. And then since those runners themselves are infrastructure that's provisioned, you want to do that with infrastructure as code. So you have this kind of catch-22. So this is what I talk about in terms of the layers of infrastructure. And we want to treat them as these decoupled kind of 4 layers, which each have their own software life cycle. And what you're talking about here is like deploying your GitHub action runners as one layer of your stack. And then the next layer would be the applications that depend on your platform and your shared services that you've deployed. And in the case of deploying your runners, this is a little bit also, like the cold start problem, where the initial provisioning of the runners themselves, that you're running Terraform for that, and you're not having Terraform manage Terraform with GitOps for that specific use case. However, what we do is we rely on a tool called Spacelift in our engagements with customers. It's like a Terraform Cloud alternative. I think we have a component for that under Cloud Posse here. It might be a little bit out of date though if we do have it. Yeah, we have our Spacelift component, Spacelift worker pool here. So the key thing about Spacelift is designed out of the box to help manage itself with infrastructure as code. So all we need to do is with ClickOps, set up the initial configuration in Spacelift, pointing it to an infrastructure repository, and then Spacelift configures itself with the Terraform code in that infrastructure repository.
Yeah. So I'm actually using the hosted version of these runners. I don't know if that makes a difference. I'm just provisioning the IMA role and then trying to import that, not import it.
Yeah,
but
so I mean, so
from
if you're
there.
using the hosted or managed version of GitHub Actions, then you're going to have to be hard coding AWS credentials in GitHub, and for obvious reasons, that is not our preferred.
I'm using the OIDC functionality. So I need to create so I'm creating a role in my AWS account, bootstrapping it from like my admin permissions on my local machine. And then from there, from the GitHub Actions, I basically assume that role from there. You know what I'm saying? Using the provider trust that I've created with the role from the OICD provider.
That's interesting. I've seen that. I haven't looked at implementing it, so I can't comment on that. But that seems like you're on the right track.
And if you commit an AWS config in your repo that has all of your various roles that can be assumed, you could probably like switch to whichever role that you need based on like whatever whatever repo you're switching to or whatever it is that you're saying you need to switch role to. Like I bet there's some logic you could come in up with that way.
Yeah. So
I posted a link to a blog post that talks about AWS federated access for GitHub.
Yeah, that's the way I'm authenticating. So like right now, I mean, I have it works right now, sort of. So I have like so I bootstrap that IMA role and then everything works. But then when I want to switch, have multiple environments for that repository. So essentially there's going to be multiple versions of that IMA role right now. Because right now I'm using the targeting functionality. That's I think someone brought up before, which you target the specific module, the IMA role module that I created from there. So I don't think I'm doing this a clean way, basically.
Yeah, I gotta read up on this. I'm not able to provide any guidance. Anybody else doing this? They can chime in.
I had a colleague investigate it, and the way they explained it to me, so I don't have to explain it, but the way it explained it to me is that essentially like you're trusting GitHub's account to validate your request, right? So you tell your GitHub workflow that, hey, this is the AWS account role that I want you to assume, and then on your side, on your AWS side, you configure your IAM role to trust GitHub's identity, GitHub's account, as well as this this repository. So you list out the repositories that can access your AWS account. And so that sets up the trust relationship. So essentially what you're trusting is you're trusting that GitHub's account doesn't get compromised.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Like log in with Facebook or log in with Apple ID or log in with Google.
Yeah.
But between AWS and GitHub Actions. And also, Adrian's post here was before this got officially announced. And meanwhile, it got officially released at GitHub Universe thing, and GitHub released some better documentation.
Yeah, there's a few changes from there. Yeah. But yeah, that whole process works very well. It's just basically, how do I create a single IMA role, and then have multiple environments use it in a repository that self-manages itself. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of juggling. So I'm new to Terraform, obviously. I've come from CloudFormation. We don't really have that kind of separation of state like you have with Terraform. So I'm just kind of trying to wrap my head around how I would potentially do that. So.
Well, thanks for bringing it up. Sorry we couldn't answer this one, but I am glad you brought it back up to my attention because I am curious about this again and want to look at it.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, like, like kind of using the layered infrastructure approach that Eric has described, I have a meta Terraform workspace, which I use Terraform to manage Terraform. And that may or may not suit your purposes. You may want to have a distinct set of credentials for that, so that you don't expand the boundaries. I think that's one approach that you could use. Because like you got to think of what Terraform really is under the hood, right? Under the hood, all Terraform is a state transition engine, right? Linked to a pair of credentials. And from that perspective, I would say that it's good to isolate that kind of that meta workload. And then put it through the same CICD pipeline.
Yeah, cool.
That's what I do.
Appreciate it. Thank y'all.
All right, let's see. So that's the end of the questions. We have a few more minutes. Anybody else have questions to cover today? Any other interesting announcements or tracks you're excited about for reInvent?
Well, if nobody has a question, this might have been covered before, but with the changes in licensing for Docker desktop, has anybody looked at alternatives, or how do they plan to approach this?
I remember there's been a few alternatives that have popped up, including one that looked pretty promising.
Rancher desktop.
Yes, the one by Rancher Desktop. Thank you. Yeah. Hey, Dale. Good to see
Hey.
you. Long time.
Thanks.
There's Rancher, there's Lima, which is a nice platform for macOS. There's Podman that's getting better. There are alternatives, but they're more focused on let's get the container up and running than what Docker Desktop is actually doing, which is let's put a pretty UI and make it easy.
Mhm.
It's not trivial to configure it, especially if you're running on macOS, for example. So what I'm gonna do is gonna pay for Docker Desktop. The ease of use and the pretty UI where I just have to click a thing and it kind of works. I mean, file system speeds on Mac are still terrible, but it's easy, it works, and I see the cost as not that big of a deal considering what I'm getting out of it.
But I thought it was only affecting organizations with more than 100 people using it, right? So not
Yes,
individuals.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
At least 250 people
Yeah.
or at least 10 million in revenue. I
Yeah.
could be wrong on the
Well,
10 million
congratulations,
figure.
Vlad, on your 10 million in revenue. That's massive accomplishment.
I work with clients that are above that, and even though I'm a consultant, it gets weird. It's $5 a month. It's not an issue. And if, again, I
Yeah.
see the value of it in making stuff easy. It's a developer productivity tool, and the time it would take me to use Lima, which I love, that would pay for a bunch of Docker desktop licenses.
I would also like to
Exactly.
offer another
Yeah.
alternative, which is to run Docker on a server hosted somewhere in the cloud, and then use your Docker context to use that as your essentially your remote hosting server for your Docker containers.
So Eric, you should step in and say about geodesic right now, because that's what we're doing with geodesic.
Well, yeah, I mean, to some degree, we're running geodesic remotely in the clusters, but I don't know. I feel like it doesn't solve the same use case that we're trying to address here.
Brew
But I
install
do agree with
K3.
what you're saying, though, about just using a remote Docker host and certificate
On an
authentication
airplane?
with them. Good luck just using Docker in general on that airplane and pulling all the other images and dependencies, or building any software for this matter. I mean, it's like, I think that it's a pipe dream these days to do local development in the traditional sense that we used to.
I don't know what you
Airplanes
guys are
also have
talking about.
internet now.
Yes,
But
but
Gitpod
you
and
can't do
Codespaces,
yeah,
Gitpod and GitHub Codespaces both support Docker.
yeah.
Mm. Excellent
Here's
point.
another one. You can brew install K3s. It runs Kubernetes without a Docker requirement on your Mac.
Yeah.
If you
Is
want
that
to run Kubernetes.
Ranchers? Is that Ranchers side project?
I forget who maintains that.
That was at like K0s, K3s, K.
Yeah.
K3s, yeah.
I keep track of
I
it.
thought that was like for embedded devices.
No, you can run it on your Mac. It's
So,
for sure.
and does anyone know if Docker machine is still alive? Because that was pretty useful.
GitLab maintains Docker machine, but essentially it's not alive.
Okay.
Mm.
But anyways, the Docker has put this new licensing in a way that it shouldn't be any problem for any size of a company. If you're more than 250 and that revenue, you probably won't be too shy to pay that license, no?
All right. Any other questions? Or announcements? Anybody using code spaces as part of their workflow yet? I'm curious. I feel like it's a generational gap. Like I think it's really cool and I want to like it, but I'm still stuck on CDs.
I'm using Gitpod if it helps. I don't like GitHub code spaces. I don't like its philosophical approach. I prefer Gitpods. But yeah, I'm using Gitpod
What's the difference in
heavily.
philosophy?
Gitpod is basically, hey, we're gonna launch VS Code in tiny containers for you. Launch as many as you want, but one per repository. You can have multiple per
Huh.
repository. I'm doing that, for example, when doing code reviews. GitHub Codespaces is more like, here's a big EC2 instance in the cloud and shove all your projects in there and make it stateful, which I
Mm,
feel ruins the whole purpose. I don't like that. So I am and have been using Gitpod heavily since I think it came out. I super much love it. I've also implemented it with a bunch of my customers. It's always been super successful. It's so easy to be able to onboard somebody instantly to a project. Click a button and you get a Gitpod workspace or a GitHub code space environment with VS Code, and you're just able to write code. No figuring out how to do weird dependency installs, no uh, having to fight with RBM to install Ruby versions or fighting with Python's virtual environment things and having to pick what you want to use. Just
But
click and it goes. If you
do you,
want a more, go ahead, Max.
yeah, do you still have a makefile that creates that Gitpod initially for you?
Yeah,
Or
they
how do
have a
you,
config file. Basically, there's a base image that you're using, and you can customize the base image. You can have tasks and things like that, like basically shell scripts.
Hmm,
And it's the same for code spaces. It's codifying your development environment, basically.
mm,
And
very
onboarding
interesting.
is instant. Like I can click a developer can click a button and they have a VS Code for Terraform module writing that has the latest version of Terraform installed, pre-commit with TF-lint and Terraform docs and everything configured, and they can just edit and everything is set up for them.
Could Cloud Posse come up with kind of like a Cloud Posse developer environment that we can share then this way
Allow
with
me to give
customers?
you a link because I have a thing. It's one of my very few OSS projects. I posted it in Zoom and I'm posting it on Slack now. I
I
have
think,
an image for Terraform actually
I mean, this is
that
the
a
idea
bunch of
of,
people have forked.
this is the idea behind Nix, right? Is that you basically like start with bare metal and then you can install anything you want, like so that you can codify developer environments and just get up and running or with a new machine, etc. So I understand not exactly the same thing, but that idea is not new.
It's also not only the speed of development, it's also the power. Like I'm running on a MacBook. Sure,
Oh
I'm
yeah.
privileged and I've got 64 gigs of RAM, but I had some really, really chunky projects where I just ran self-hosted Gitpod on some beefy EC2 instances with a couple terabytes of RAM. And a build that took half an hour was a couple minutes. That's a big deal. And everybody was able to do that easily.
Yeah.
And yeah, what Eric is looking right now is Gitbot Terraform. It's an image I'm using for Terraform stuff. It's basically just installing a bunch of helpful Terraform things, but no AWS CLI or AWS Vault or things like that because I don't think you should use those there.
So to Max's
Oh,
point, Max, this is what would be really rad to have kind of a Git pod version of GDSIC.
oh, it's running
I'd
yeah,
in,
love to see that.
yeah.
it's like basically it gives you the UI and basically
Yeah.
gives you a Docker image that you can run with UI, but it will be trying like a shot to you through.
And no more M1 problems to worry about.
Yeah, it really makes sense to a certain degree, but unless
Interesting.
someone really makes it easy to work with X11 server from the
Do you have
Docker
your
image.
choice? Can I pull like Debian latest or Alpine latest or CentOS latest kind of images or?
Yep. And the image that I'm using here is open source, like they maintain it. It has a bunch of helpful things, including some Gitpod specific things, but you can build your own. I did that with customers. I'm using this one because
Mhm.
it's cached.
Mhm.
And I wanted to say something else, but I just forgot what. Ah, evil memory.
Can
Oh,
I?
yes, you can connect to Gitpod and GitHub Codespaces using the VS Code remote extension from your laptop. So you can
Hmm.
still run it. So you can still
Yeah,
run VS
this
Code
is not
on your
mutually
laptop
exclusive.
using the same key bindings, the same everything, but
Mm.
actually doing everything on a server.
Can I
Eric,
ask
if
like?
you want to see, I posted
Oh,
a
this is
link in
pretty
the
rad. And then you
Zoom.
can just have a button to launch it. I like it.
Don't click
Yeah.
there. I posted a link in the Zoom chat. It's a Terraform module, unmaintained-ish Terraform module that has a Gitpod config. And if you click on opening Gitpod,
How do I already have this started? I wonder.
no, you open Gitpod
Or-
Terraform. You just started
okay.
earlier
Okay. Yeah. What was the one link you
in
said to
the
go to?
Zoom chat. In
Oh,
the
Zoom
Zoom
chat.
chat. Yeah, it's a small Terraform module for running some really helpful software that I haven't maintained because I haven't used it. But it's a Terraform module, that's what matters. And if you scroll tiny bit, there is the Gitpod ready to code badge there right in the middle. You should be able to click on it. Above
Mm-hmm.
introduction. You should be able to
Mm-hmm.
click on it if the link still works. Continue with
Mm-hmm.
GitHub. It's gonna create an account for you. It's gonna be a whole thing, but it's a pretty quick thing. But you're gonna be able to see how it
Oh, they
actually
just stole
looks
all
like.
your personal data.
Yeah.
Do-do-do-do.
Good hack. Live hack.
He
Well,
just
it's a
socially engineered
concern.
you.
On one hand, that's a concern because Gitpod doesn't have that much RBAC built in because that is handled on the GitHub side. Like if you already have access to the repo, Gitpod is gonna get access. And this is gonna pull the image and you're gonna get a VS Code with a bunch of Terraform things, the latest Terraform installed. And you can just start writing Terraform. It does take a while because I haven't used this image in a while and I don't think it's cached on any nodes. Oh, there you go.
I like to ask, when might I want to use code spaces over Gitpod? I want to hear the counter opinion so that I can kind of
Yeah.
understand the scoping.
Yeah. Now
I
unsell us. Somebody.
Let me think. So Codespaces is better integrated since it's a GitHub official product.
Mm-hmm.
In Codespaces, you can clone multiple repos in the same codespace. So you can have 2, 3, 4 different repositories in the same codespace. You can do the same thing in Gitpod, but it's not as easy because it's not built on the same idea. So if you're doing a distributed monolith and not proper microservices or a proper monolith, Codespaces might be a better idea. They're both super easy to get started with and tested, so you can try them like that and see what works for you. Um, I'm trying to think of other benefits for Codespaces, but none come to mind right now.
Yeah, at least but yeah, the native integration would be a selling point for me. I guess code spaces though, sorry, Gitpod is not GitHub specific. So if you are dependent on GitLab and GitHub as part of your organization, that would be another use case maybe for it.
Yeah,
If I
if
already
you're
have
running
like a
Bitbucket,
vendor,
GitLab.
yeah, if I already have GitHub as a vendor, right? It would just be another line item on the pre-existing contract, right? If I were to go code spaces. But then if I
Yeah.
wanted to go Gitpod, I might have to set up a new vendor relationship. Would you say
Yeah,
that's
maybe.
correct?
Exactly.
Yeah, from
Yeah.
that point, user. I think a huge point of all of these products is that when you're working on a compliant environment, you basically don't need to provision anyone access. You just give them their workspace access, which is basically a rendered screen on their monitor, and they cannot exfiltrate any data even if they want, because they don't physically touch it on their laptops. They just see it on their screens. So it's like a much less of a vector attack when you don't provision VPNs and you do this instead.
That's
Like
why we
it-
should run all our fat desktop clients in Citrix and go back to the 90s.
Yes, that's
There was a point in my career when I worked for a bank, and that was actually how they worked. So
I know,
like,
I've done it.
the anti-pattern there is that it was so obstructive to development that developers were literally buying their own MacBooks, coding on their MacBooks, and then rewriting by hand, because there's no copy and paste, rewriting
Yeah.
by hand the code that they had just written somewhere else.
Wow. Wow.
this thing should be faster because it renders on your browser. So
Yeah.
it's not an
It's
RDP
also super
flawless.
nice if you just want to code from an underpowered machine. Like it's not gonna spin up the funnels on my MacBook. I can code on a MacBook Air without any issues. Uh, in the before times when I used to travel, I could code from my iPad.
Mhm. No command tab though. I mean, got to use a different
on.
shortcut.
iPad has command tab.
No, I mean now it's in a browser window. It's not an application. So
Oh, that
I
yeah.
now have to like command backtick or whatever to go through all my windows instead of command tab.
That's all right. Yeah, that's a deal breaker. Okay. No, that's
Eric
really
is
sorry.
checking out the Gitbot thing. So it's yes, you do have access to Docker run, Docker info. This is basically running a container in GCP. It's the hosted version. They also offer self-hosted version, so you can host your own Gitpod in AWS, and you can, I don't know, use test data from S3 at ridiculous speeds because you're running on EC2s in the same region, and you can get those terabytes of RAM that I was alluding to earlier, or super powerful GPUs.
So another another use case of this would be like I was running geodesic in New York cloud for some period, because when you apply a lot of Terraform from your laptop and you're sitting in Europe and you're working on the West Coast AWS region, then you have lots of latency and your Terraform basically applying forever. And when you do run your geodesic in New York or that same region, the only latency that you see is the latency between like Terraform apply and you hit enter, and everything else applies just immediately. So that really, when I did those region spin-ups for like a CC1 region spin-up, that was I was mostly doing it from a console, and that saved me tons of time. So that's another use case for this product. It's like just spin it close to the region you work on, and you will not have any issues with that anymore.
Yeah, do you have the option of selecting the data center, Vlad?
For the hosted version, I don't know. I think they do what's closest to you. So I think they have a US and EU version. Oops, sorry, not version, but regions, and it just chooses the closest one to you. But again, you can self-host this if you want to. And what we're also doing here, like this repo is a Terraform repository. Like there's not really a run. But if you go to a code repository, I linked to one of mine in the chat that has a broken label though. It's way better. I don't know if you'll have time to check it out. So this has the broken label. So Eric, you're gonna need to go to the URL bar, and before github.com, type in before it, so don't delete it. Before
I would be surprised
HTTPS.
if it was after.
Oh my god, hold on. It's just easier if I type it and send it to you. Give me a second. to check that
I just want to know how we get secrets into this environment so we can use them with our development stuff.
Okay, I posted the thing in the Zoom chat. You can
Ooh.
set environment variables per user. They have an UI for that in Gitpod. And you can also do stuff like using AWS SSO, for example. I do the very chill version of copying the keys and pasting them in the terminal, which is not ideal, but it's fast and it's supported by all the tools that don't support AWS SSO, like AWS CDK or CDK for Terraform. But yeah, what Eric is doing now, he's opening, I think it's a Python app. I know it's a tiny code app, but what we're gonna see is that the app is compiled, the app is tested, the app is running, a nice README is opened up, and that's it. Like you just click a button and the app is running. You don't have to figure out, oh, do I need to use a makefile? Do I need to, I don't know, run whatever, break run, Ruby build, whatever. It's just there. You click a button, you wait 1 or 2 minutes. If this would
Well,
load.
you don't leave developers any window to drink their coffee anymore. They cannot complain it compiles for 15 minutes. So they have to work all the day, and this will lead them to
Oh.
extinction.
Just make this a C++ program, and then you can still do that.
Yeah. We have to start writing new frameworks much faster right now because our laptops will be like of size of a large EC2 instance.
Because
Lot
that's what's
of
going to start
open
happening.
source repositories have set up for Gitpod though, including what was it? The AWS CDK has one. It's just click and go. Kubernetes repositories have config for this. I think this may actually be hanged. You might be able to hit refresh in that tab. Sometimes it just
Okay,
looks like it's
I'll check
loading and it's
that.
actually done. But yeah,
That's pretty cool.
and there, if you go to gitpod.io, I think they have some examples or something somewhere of repos that are already configured for it, and they had a bunch of hackathons to add support for more, two more open source repositories. So contributors can just click and get started. And what we're seeing here is on the left, we have the get started thing. On the right, we have a browser with the app already running. On the lower left, we have the build and run and runtimes logs. And on the right, we have some helpful docs for the user. Like no PyEnv setup, no pip messing, no
That's nice.
anything. You just click the button and it's running. And this has the debugger fully configured. So you can just click run and debug the application. No trying to figure out and get them working. Like it's super, super, super fast and I love it.
Yeah, man, I gotta say, as a hardcore lifetime Python fanboy, this is pretty sweet.
Yeah.
To be fair,
Thanks a lot.
it's still VS Code. Like you're not gonna get
Yeah.
the same power you have with Visual Studio or IntelliJ or Rider or any other tools, but this is enough for
Yeah,
a lot of workloads.
yeah, I agree. You rarely need that.
You can install
Refactoring.
extensions, of course.
Well, it's really sweet for like open source projects where you've got lots of people like coming in and making small changes. You know, you can
Yeah.
just
Mhm.
give them a consistent environment and not have to worry about them messing up
Yeah.
their dependencies.
Yeah, like the whole
Yeah.
section of a README, how to contribute, is like ending
God.
up being just a one link.
Yeah.
Click here.
You
Yeah,
click, click and sync.
But where did you say Kubernetes had a Gitpod setup?
Gitpod.yaml. I think I saw one.
Wow,
I searched for
that's
Git.
actually-
Gitpod.yaml. Gitpod.yml
No,
is the no.
no word pod in the page.
I posted a link in the Zoom chat. I knew they had a list of projects that are configured because I also had to configure a bunch. Zoom chat,
That's-
not Slack. I can post it on Slack if it's easier. But
Oh,
yeah,
this is sweet.
and if you scroll here, all of this have been configured for GitHub. Like Prometheus
Nice.
can click a button and contribute to Prometheus, or you can steal these configs and use them for your own company, which I
Yeah.
did extensively.
So do you just drop out to like a command line to do your Git commands like from there? Like if you want to create a pull request and commit and like do all that stuff?
If
I would
Eric
not-
would go back, you have it's just like
So I
VS
hear
Code.
sign in to GitHub.
Ah,
Yeah, so that's the GitHub extension, and you get
Yeah.
pull requests and everything.
Nice.
This is literally running VS Code, so you have access
Yeah,
to
yeah,
all
yeah.
the extensions. And if you
I
go to
run-
the third icon there, that's the Git, like it's the branch
Right,
thing.
that's
You can
the
just commit,
changes.
select files, just like in VS Code.
This is nice.
Yeah, I use VS Code every day, but I still do all my Git operations on the CLI. It's I can't click and do all those things. Like I have to type the commands. That's from years and years of just doing it that way.
Yeah.
I get it.
I find
Also,
myself
Eric,
typing Vim in the little windows here accidentally because it's so hard to get.
this
Get out of
is
it.
also super awesome, and Eric, this might be relevant for y'all. It's awesome for workshop meetups or
Yeah,
trainings.
yeah, I can totally.
Because
see
you
that.
don't have to spend any time, everybody has the same
Yeah.
environment, and you can share workspaces. Like you can share this URL with somebody, and they can
Yeah.
code together with you or watch you code. Like
Yeah.
I use this extensively for workshops, and if a student I know is having issues, they can just send me the link. I in there, and we're debugging. There's no more, oh, Docker is not running on this particular attendee's laptop because they have a weird VPN running that's conflicting with it, and we spent
Oh.
3 hours wasting time on that.
So multiple people can use the same URL and basically like pair code or like kind of Google Doc
Yep.
style.
Yep.
That's pretty cool.
Wow.
And does the person presenting get a dialogue confirming or accepting them to join? I assume.
Yep. If you actually go
Okay.
to the Gitpod thing, I think there's a file share or yeah, top left button, like the hamburger button, and there should be a share somewhere. Oh, Gitpod share running workspace or share workspace snapshot. So
Wow.
a snapshot
Uh,
is like creating a clone of it so they can run their own thing, or you can just share the URL and they're telling you, hey, they're getting access to it.
Yeah, that's cool. Wow. Well, yeah, that was really awesome. Thanks, Vlad. 2 for 2 today. Pretty awesome
I think-
updates there.
I think Vlad has just qualified him for a batch of my wife's cookies.
Yes.
I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued.
Or maybe even some jam.
See, now I'm really
Yeah.
pissed off that I'm not flying to the US for reInvent. I would have gotten cookies. And
Oh.
it's always a pleasure being here and chatting with you all. I'm also learning a bunch, so thank you, Eric, for organizing these.
My pleasure, Vlad. Well, we are out of time for today. I'm going to leave it at this. It was a really awesome session with interesting things that we all learned here today. So if you want to catch up on this or share it with your team, we'll be posting a video recording of this session in a couple hours to our YouTube channel. If you haven't already subscribed to our weekly office hours, you can head over to cloudposse.com/office hours. Again, that's cloudposse.com/office hours, and you'll get an email invitation to our weekly gatherings here. We also have a online podcast where we syndicate all of our office hour segments. If you haven't yet connected with me on LinkedIn, head over to linkedin.com/in/Osterman. I always like to connect with our community and stay on top of what you're working on. So thanks, everyone. Have a great holiday if you're here in the US, and everyone else, enjoy your week. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.